So a couple of years ago, one of my friends hits me up about the opportunity to join this band. He's like, I'm gonna be the bass player, but we're in desperate need of a lead guitar player, and we're hoping to start playing shows on a semi-regular basis. Now, I had definitely been overexerting myself musically just a little bit at this time, between the live things that I was doing as well as making videos, but I knew that it had always been my dream to be in a serious band, and I thought, well, this might be my shot. So I said I was in, auditioned, eventually got the part, and we went straight into practicing for the first couple shows. Now, this was the first time that I had ever been in any sort of band like this. All of my projects before, outside of, say, church, had been a very eclectic mix of genres. Anything from neo soul all the way up to like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But this was the first time I was ever going to be in a band that really focused on just one specific thing, and that specific thing was classic rock. And believe me when I say everything was classic rock, the originals, the covers, anything from Marshall Tucker Band to the Rolling Stones, I had to learn all of it, and it really did become a really good exercise in musicianship. It really pushed me playing wise to learn a lot of songs that were way more complex than I had originally perceived them to be when I had passively listened to them at like barbecue type contexts. But just as important as figuring out the riffs and licks was figuring out what gear I was gonna use. And like I said before, I had never done a classic rock gig, so I really only had a few general ideas of what classic rock was even supposed to sound like when it pertains to the electric guitar. So guitar-wise, I decided I was going to bring my Tele, but amp-wise, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I have an orange OR30 that I thought would be absolutely perfect tonally and vibe-wise, but I didn't really feel like dragging this 40-pound monster the 75-minute drive that I would have to go every week to practice along with my guitar and my pedal board, so I decided that the easiest thing that I could do would probably just be to bring my Helix. Not necessarily the typical move for the genre, but I knew that it was versatile enough to do just about anything, and it would completely eliminate the need to take both a pedal board and an amp to most gigs and practices. The only question was, what patch was I actually going to use? And I had been used to using the Fender and the Vox style stuff for my usual gigs, but for this one in particular, I wanted something with just a little bit more oomph. So I take out my Helix and I start scrolling, and I see those usual ones that I was telling you about, the US and the A30 as they called them, but right as I'm scrolling towards the bottom, I end up seeing one that happened to be called the J45, and it kind of caught my eye. Now, I knew that Line 6 probably wasn't formally allowed to use the term Marshall, but it seemed like the exact right choice for the gig, so I dialed it in and I went to work. And the second I brought this thing to our very first gig at the local Harley Davidson, battling both people talking and the other instruments in the band, I could tell this amp sim, well, it could really rip. It was the first time I had really utilized a Marshall sound after having bought one and returned one years earlier, and really never having embraced it even with all of the VSTs that I've had over the years. I thought to myself, there really is something to this Marshall sound, even in a digitally recreated fashion, but that's as far as I really ever thought it was gonna go. That is until about a month ago when I happened to get my hands on this amp pedal right here that's also a digital recreation of a Marshall, except for this time a Marshall Plex. Now, it really all started with me trying to figure out the pedal as a whole, but the more I did that, I started to go deeper, even deeper than I had ever gone with the Helix tones all those years ago at the gig. And for the first time in probably about 8 years, I started to really ask myself the question, what would it look like if I tried out a real Marshall for the first time in a long time? But there were so many add-ons in terms of what I would actually go for, and I had quite the range. The Fujanti fan in me wanted to go with the Silver Jubilee, or maybe I could give a chance to one of the combo amps like the DLC 20. But I kind of knew I wanted to try out one of the heads, and that's when I remembered that a couple years back, Marshall had actually dropped a line of amps that had slightly intrigued me. They didn't have the usual black and gold aesthetics that Marshalls tend to be known for, so initially I was actually a bit turned off. So I decided to check it out purely out of curiosity. It ships here, I open it, I start playing it, I start doing my research, and come to find out that a lot of the original, like the OG Marshalls, actually look a lot more like this thing than the black and gold that I'm used to. And not only that, but the whole point of this amp was that they were trying to create this tribute to the first amp Jim Marshall ever made, the JTM45, and that's when I remembered that that was the exact amp that I was using the digital recreation of all those years at the gig, except for this time, well, they were actually allowed to use the Marshall name. So this guy right here is the Marshall JTM20. exactly what I pictured in my head when I started to think about my first Marshall, if I was ever even going to go down that route. But the more I actually learn about this amp, the more I realize I think it was a good first step into that world. And that's for a couple reasons. Number one being that this amp is very different from a Plexi, and that's the sound that I've been basing all of my presumptions of Marshalls on for the past couple months since I started playing through that amp pedal, which is based on Super Lead. But the JTM 45 is a completely different animal. The Super Lead was designed to have a lot more gain than the 45, and that's something I could tell instantly when I plugged into this guy right here. Even cranked high input, high treble all the way up, I was really surprised with how much this thing actually didn't break up. Get me wrong, I'm definitely not trying to describe this as a clean tone, but in my mind, because most of the Plexi recreations that I've been playing through have been like EVH Brown setting amps when they get really cranked, it really kind of defied my expectations on what a cranked Marshall was really supposed to be. And at first I thought that was just because I was using single coils with the Pacifica, but even once I went to the bridge humbucker, it wasn't necessarily like I was starting to get some sort of metal tone. And I think this gave me much more of an idea of how much variety there actually is between different Marshall amps, because this was regardless of which channel I was using. Even when I started to combine the high treble and the normal settings, I don't think it really got to that high gain thing until I started to really experiment with how this thing was going to take pedals. Now, the initial basic setup was just the DS1 into the amp, and the thing that I really liked was, even though this thing can't actually get metal, it can break up enough to where neither this nor the DS1 has to do either of the heavy lifting, so I could keep the DS1 at like 40%, and that's when I started to realize, okay, maybe this is the more boomer Marshall sound that I've really been looking for. And I've seen this type of thing done a lot more recently, where these companies will take a legendary amp like the JTM 45, not just with Marshall, even with like PRS with the Grissom or the HDRX, and they'll make the tribute version without skimping on the quality in any form and still making it a tube amp. No shade at all to like Fender with their Tone Master series, because I really like those amps. But it's cool to see this way done with companies like Marshall that give a completely different perspective on your entryway into some of these amps. And I think it was a cool experience to check out my first Marshall. But at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters what I think. What matters is what you think. So please let me know. Do you like Marshall amps? Do you not like Marshall amps? What's your favorite? The Plexi, the JTM 45? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. It was really fun for the first time ever on the channel to be able to play a Marshall. But also I feel like I've been on a real boomer streak. My last 3 videos have been Gibson, Marshall. So it'll be interesting to see how my guitar playing progresses forward, as going from the Strat guy talking about Tim Henson to now Gibson Marshalls. We'll see where all this goes. But also, if you want to know anything more about this amp right here, the JTM 20, I got it from the homies at Sweetwater. The links are in the description. Make sure to check it out. It's one of the best ways to support the channel if that's something you want to do. Or if you're just curious about any of the other gear that I use in this video, the guitar, the aux box, the pedals, make sure to check out those links. Also, thank you so much to any and all of my patrons. There's some extra exclusive stuff on there if you want to join the community. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most importantly, like most important of all, have a fantastic night.